Hello everyone, wherever you are in the world, and you're hello everyone. Hello everyone, wherever you are in the world, and you'll be listening to this recording in October at the Textile and Place conference in Manchester. Hello everyone. Hello everyone.
Better pass boldly now into that other world in the full glory of some passion than fade and wither dismally with age. Better pass boldly into that other world in the full glory of some passion than fade and wither dismally with age. He thought of how she who lay beside him had locked in her heart for so many years that image of her lover's eyes when he had told her that he did not wish to live.
1, 2.
Generous tears filled Gabriel's eyes. He had never felt like that himself towards any woman, but he knew that such a feeling must be love. The tears gathered more thickly in his eyes, and in the partial darkness, he imagined he saw the
One, two. Might take a moment. Yep, so that came through fine. So 1, 2. Check, check, 1, 2. You only hear my voice once. You can test that now if you like.
Okay. Yeah, give it a test. Your father remains stuck on the border, genocide zone. Nobody is reporting from there, so nothing is said. The child draws pictures of a burning house, singing history in makeshift schools. You plant and write, plant and write. What else is there to do? Peas on the roof beside the ash fire. You knot back the twine and forecast clouds. You write, blot out, jail of air, and the words mean the same in the morning. Is it a bit closer? Yeah. Why is it you live in the largest refugee camp in the world and they're calling it a lost national treasure, a forgotten park? They ask you to plant trees to save the environment. Yes, you think, a few more trees to hide the smell of the latrine. You happy with that?
Like, if you get as close as I am, you get very clear.
Uh-huh.
Further away, it falls off quite a lot. Like, even just at this length. Like,
Mind
the
if I
difference
just-
between that.
If I remove the lectern, it might be a little easier. Yeah. It's heavy, isn't it?
Well, hello.
You fall asleep in the Zocalo and dream of a tiger wrapped around the neck of a lion. You wake to Garcia Moreno's hard stare and the sound of a man rinsing his teeth in the marble fountain. I think it's better without the lectern. Yeah? Great, thanks. For emphasis, I'll just lean closer when I need to. Great.
Or something like that. I never knew rightly. Poor fella. He was very fond of me. And he was such a gentle boy.
Well, hello.
Walking, you know, Gabriel.
Well, hello, everyone, wherever you are in the world, and you'll be listening.
He had a very good voice. Fury. Well, and then? And then, when it came for the time for me to leave Galway and come up to the convent, he was much worse. And I wouldn't be
Okay.
Hello everyone and welcome to Manchester Poetry Library. My name's Martin Kratz, I'm the Programme Manager. I'm just here to do a bit of housekeeping before I hand over to Anthony and the team to start the event proper. Welcome to Manchester Poetry Library. First things first, you know where the exit is because you came through it. If you're looking for the toilets, they are as you come out straight on your right. If there should be an emergency, follow the. You can follow me out of the doors to the park, and that's where we congregate if there's a fire alarm, and that wouldn't be a drill. If you've got any questions about the library, this is a lovely event because we've got an interval, so there's actually time to catch up and things. So you can ask me questions, which is really nice, which we don't always have. So if you've got questions about the library, about the collection, anything, you can come find me, the Programme Manager. I'm also going to ask Becky, the Director, to give a wave. So we're actually fully staffed here to answer your questions, so please do. The only other thing I'll say, if you're not a member, pick up a bookmark, follow the link, follow the QR code, and all the information's there. And I'm going to leave it there. So I'm going to come off now, and I'm going to hand over. I think we're going to play the first piece, after which Anthony's going to come. So thank you very much, and enjoy the evening.
Gymeni díomh. Agus is mór an ór dósa. Bheith mar bhean brethe an chéad bhailiúchan ile de Anthony. Good evening to you all over there in Manchester. And it's a huge honour for me to be asked to bless and be a midwife to Anthony's, I think, 4th collection. We met in November last under COVID situations, and the two of us were the only live people presenting at the Cork Poetry Festival. And then with his family and himself, we formed a very strong, albeit very short bond. And so I had hoped to be with you live, but between the jigs and the reels, as we say here in Ireland, that wasn't possible. So I'm now going to improvise just a little blessing for you to start this marvellous occasion of Anthony's poetry. The earth and all the plants that grow, the trees and all the fruits they show, the fairy beasts my yoke that know, all in my homestead I unite, all in his homestead Anthony unites. 'Tis a gift to be simple, 'tis a gift to be free, 'tis a gift to come down where we ought to be, and we ought to be here to launch Anthony's poetry this evening. And when we find ourselves in the place just right, 'twill be in the valley of love and delight. In true simplicity is gained, to bow and to bend, we'll not be ashamed to turn. Will be our delight, and by turning, they come down right. Peace is flowing like a river, flowing out through you and me. flowing out through you and me, spreading out into the desert, setting all our spirits free.
Mischievous performance. They were not disappointed. Nervous laughter greeted the semi-comic irascibility of his declaration that, as someone 7 months short of 80, he had a rule to exasperate. In his first lecture in 2010, Hill had promised a future evaluation of contemporary British poetry. And in a subsequent lecture, he did not hold back, appraising creative writing as a neoliberal efflorescence of a doomed literary culture with its plethora of literary prizes and false evaluation of its own salubriousness. Anti-elitist accessibility was the buzzword du jour, Hill argued in 2010. But accessible, he said, should be reserved as an adjective for supermarkets or public lavatories, not as a value judgment in a discussion of contemporary poetry. In contrast, Hill declared in 2011 that he was marooned in the 1950s with the work of Ezra Pound and T.S. Eliot. Subsequent comments in his lecture incurred media coverage. He accused Caroline Duffy of publishing poetry of the same quality as a Mills and Boon novel, or the work of one of her creative writing students. Lem Sissay offered a riposte in The Guardian, decrying the spat between two esteemed contemporary poets as like two opposite corners of a boxing ring. Caroline Duffy's response was a dignified silence, and the media interest soon dissipated. But Hill's lecture posed a series of questions that have concerned me throughout the writing of this book. What would it mean if contemporary poetry had a rule to exasperate? How might the critic account for this creative recalcitrance? If readers can never quite grasp such challenging writing, how might critics account conceptually for that which we cannot understand? It is also telling that Hill was completely silent about experimental writing. Would it be possible to talk about the challenge of Hill's poems and innovative writers in a way that would allow the analysis of both forms of poetry, despite their obvious formal differences? Should Hill and other authors stuck with these poets in the 50s be regarded as late modernists, out of step with the current trend, as Hill regarded it in 2011, for accessibility conceived as democratic writing? Or could their poetry be analysed in the context of metamodernism, a term that was beginning to gain traction in the same year that Hill delivered his lecture in 2011? At this point, I have to get my glasses so I can see the slides. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming to the reading today. Thank you to Martin Kratz at the back and all the staff at the Poetry Library for making this possible. Thank you to the publishers. Thank you to my poetry publishers as well, ARC, that have come today. It's great to see you. And I should also thank the HRC, Arts and Humanities Research Council, for giving me time to write this book that I'm going to be talking about for the next 10 minutes or so. And one of the great things about being able to engage with contemporary British poetry in this book is that I get to then invite the writers that I've talked about in the book to help me to launch and to be part of this kind of creative and critical event tonight. So all the writers that are here tonight, Scott at the back, James Byrne at the front, Sandeep, who will be beaming in remotely, are all either referenced or mentioned or talked about at length in this book. So before those readings and performances, just for about 8 minutes or so, I'm going to try and explain what the book is about. For those that are on the live stream, who are part of the HRC Metamodernism network as well, you will have heard the stuff on the first slide, so just bear with me. Why Metamodernism? Well, there's 2 versions that I've talked about on the network before of what this term means. Firstly, very simply, legacies of modernist writing, all that experimental, exciting writing of the 1920s, 1930s, Eliot, Joyce, Gertrude Stein, H.D., and so on. Secondly, metamodernism is talked about as a particular structure of feeling in the present, to use that Raymond Williams term, what it means to live in the present. This is the work of people like Tim Vermeulen, Robin van der Acker, Alison Gibbons. I'm not going to talk about that tonight because it's not really the concern of the book, although I do talk a bit about that in the long conclusion. But I'm more concerned in this book with these kind of legacies of modernist writing. Why metamodernism then, as opposed to many, many other terms that are used to discuss those legacies? Well, very quickly, late modernism, some critics say, how late can late modernism be, given we're now in the centenary year of the publication of James Joyce's Ulysses, T.S. Eliot's A Wasteland, for example. So 100 years on, should we still be talking about how late modernism is? Some critics prefer metamodernism because some people refer, like Frederick Jameson, to proper modernism. So proper modernism is something that happened in the 1920s and 1930s. Now we're in this kind of attenuated phase of modernism in the 21st century, which is obviously a kind of detrimental to talking about writing in the present. It's always something which is too late. It's not quite as good as what was happening 100 years ago. And thirdly, some critics talk about modernism as a kind of cultural melancholia. It's something which is just kind of repeated endlessly in the present. Madeleine Detloff talks about this, about how contemporary writing can only recirculate modernism in patched forms. So metamodernism may be a term which doesn't completely get around these issues, but can kind of talk about them in a slightly different way. Okay, next slide then, please, we can. Just to give you a very, very quick example of what I mean in terms of the idea of belatedness and late modernism, how we might begin to think beyond this. I wanted to give you the last lines of one of the books that I talk about at length, which is Geoffrey Hill's Scenes from Comus, a collection from 2005. And in writing about this idea of belatedness, I say on page 5, if I'm allowed to quote from my own book when I'm launching it, Geoffrey Hill's Scenes from Comus does not remint the work of T.S. Eliot in an act of belated artistic pageantry. It's not something which is entirely beholden to Eliot's work. The collection ends, in shifting scapes, eternity resumes. I cannot fault its nature, act by act, gauged by the lost occasions of the sun. Ephemera's durance, vast particulars, and still momentum measures of the void. What did you say? Apart from possibly being my favourite ending to a poetry collection ever, I just wanted to make the brief point that Hill's kind of rewriting Eliot's 4 quartets in the particularly quotes directly with the momentum phrase. He's referring deliberately back to Eliot, but it's just not, my argument is, a kind of regurgitation of modernism. It's doing something else. And of course, it particularly does something else in that last line. What did you say? The kind of line that Eliot would never use. It's a kind of a questioning of whether you can still write like this in the present, what it means to rewrite Eliot in 2005. And also, I think there's a kind of impishness deliberately in that phrase, what did you say? It's as if Hill is kind of imagining the voice of a reader who's saying, what on earth are you talking about? Why are you still using this grandiose language in 2005? I don't get it, I don't understand it. So he's beginning, Hill, to kind of broaden out to engage with contemporary poetry and poetics as a whole, I think, in this collection. Okay, next slide, please. What do I particularly write about then in terms of these legacies of modernism? Well, I focus in the book on the idea of enigmaticalness. which I take from Theodore Adorno's book Aesthetic Theory from 1970. It's a picture of Adorno on the left. I like this one because it's when he had hair, most of the pictures which depict Adorno when he was a bit older. So, what is the enigma? Adorno talks, well, he uses many examples, but just to pick two briefly so I can fit it into this 10 minutes, he uses the example of the Great Sphinx. You can say, you know, we've got this kind of thing in the middle of the desert. It dates back to 2500 BC. It vaguely resembles the pharaoh at the time, Khafra. But then what? That information doesn't help you to understand why there's a huge cat in the middle of the desert. You know, what does it mean? It doesn't explain that. Secondly, music. Adorno says, you know, you can have extremely brilliant, proficient musicians who are playing, you know, Beethoven, Bach, but that doesn't explain what the music is about. That proficiency doesn't explain the meaning of music, which remains enigmatic. What does this mean for poetry? Well, he says that, I say, enigmatic poets drawing on Adorno's work are unsolvable. They are not like that Geoffrey Hill piece that I showed you on the last slide. They are not just vessels for interpretation, which means there's a kind of failure of criticism when we're trying to write about this kind of modernist inflected verse. And Adorno talks about this in terms of the remainder. The remainder is something which you always can't get to, can't quite grasp as a critic. And this is important to me for the study of literature as a whole, because it means it's a methodological challenge to the entirety of what we're doing as professional critics and academics, which is that we kind of perform a mastery, and I use that gendered term advisedly, of text when we write about them. We kind of screen out the bits that we don't quite understand because they're a challenge to our mastery, or the bits that don't quite fit with our argument. Get rid of those. Let's just focus on our performance of reading the books. And as I've kind of indicated in relation to music and the Sphinx, you know, this isn't just something which is to do with literature. There's a musician, Ermin Schmidt. Has anybody heard of Ermin Schmidt? No? He was somebody who was in the krautrock band Can, that some of you might have heard of. And Ermin Schmidt, you know, I don't think Adorno would approve of krautrock, but what Ermin Schmidt is something very similar to Adorno in talking about enigmatic pieces of music and art. He says that there is always something that eludes the understanding of such music or writing, and which precisely is at the heart of what we like about it. It returns to delight, frustrate, and engross the critic. Okay, next slide, please. So last slide, what does this mean into the enigma and enigmaticalness in terms of contemporary British poetry? Well, right back in the 60s, Adorno is writing about de-aestheticized literature and the idea of the reality principle of poetry, which just refers to something which exists and that's it. And this, Adorno is saying, is completely against the idea of enigmaticalness and the enigma. And I think that even though this is in the 60s, actually what it says is even more pertinent, I think, in 2022 than it was in 1969. David Kennedy, as a kind of symptom of this, says in his book Back in the 90s, New Relations, he notes that increasingly on the back of poetry collections, people tend to write about what the poets did apart from being writers, which he begins to think is rather odd, and I think it's rather odd. I say in the book it'd be like judging the quality of winemakers on their production of fetching hats. It just seems a really kind of strange thing to do. And John Redmond goes to the extent of saying that universities are now nurturing a poetic class which is not merely anti-academic, but to an alarming degree hostile to intelligent scrutiny. So it might seem at this point, for those of you that know about the poetry wars from the 1960s, that I'm beginning to engage in contemporary British poetry in terms of an opposition between what's termed mainstream poetry and innovative poetry. And you might think that I'm saying that, you know, innovative poetry is enigmatical completely and mainstream isn't. And very broadly, I would probably agree with that, but it's not actually what I do in the book, because I say that actually there is poetry like Hill's that kind of falls down the cracks of the categories mainstream and innovative. And enigmaticalness is not just found in innovative poetry. There are examples of it in some mainstream writers as well. I've given you the example of Hill. earlier on in the presentation. I even talk about Don Patterson's The Sea at Brighton and say that he begins to engage with enigmatical lyricism, but kind of draws back. There's always a kind of a blokishness which comes to the fore, which means that he can't kind of complete and doesn't want to complete that. He refers to, in one of his very good books, an elegy for Michael Donaghy called Rain. He says, I can't keep this bullshit up.
Informal salubriousness, luxuriating, formal personality over truth, luxuriate in formal salubriousness, low personality over truth, low vitality, fueled by favors, low vitality, fueled by favors. What is metamodernism? Personality over truth. Weave negatively a sphere hostile to public scrutiny. Master, master unsolvable puzzles. Fail. What is modernism? What is metamodernism? Fail to understand. Fail to understand what is. Fail to understand what is. What is. What is. Recalcitrant. Recalcitrant. Fail to understand what is recalcitrant. Meta-modernism. Recalcitrant. Pockets. Recalcitrant. Pockets. Exercise. 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 Exercise the remainder. Indeft. Indeft. Indeft exposition. Not statement. Not statement. What is metamodernism? Personality over truth. Not statement. Not statement. Not statement. Not information. Information. Not information. Personality over truth. Repeated. 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 Repeated personality over what is repeated over and 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 over, repeated and over and over and over, repeated and over and over and over and over, but never exactly the same. Beyond breadth. Beyond breath. Beyond breadth. Enigmatical. Beyond enigmatical. Beyond enigmatical remainder. Thank you.
We'll take a short break.
Something like that. I never knew rightly. Poor fella. He was very fond of me. And he was such a gentle boy. We used to go out together, walking, you know, Gabriel, just like they do in the country. He was going to study singing, only for his health. He had a very good voice, poor Michael Fury. Well, and then when it came for the time for me to leave Galway and come up to the convent, he was much worse, and I wouldn't be let see him. So I wrote him a letter saying I was going up to Dublin and would be back in the summer, and hoping he'd be better then. Then the night before I left, I was in my grandmother's house on Nuns Island packing up, and I heard gravel thrown up against the window. The window was so wet I couldn't see, so I ran downstairs as I was and slipped out the back into the garden. And there was the poor fella at the end of the garden, shivering. And did you not tell him to go back? I implored of him to go home at once and told him that he'd get his death in the rain. But he said he did not want to live. I can see his eyes so well, so well. He was standing at the end of the wall where there was a tree. And did he go home? Yes, he went home. And when I was only a week in the convent, he died. And he was buried in Outhrard, where his people came from. Oh, the day I heard that he was dead. She stopped, choking with sobs and overcome by emotion, flung herself face downward on the bed, sobbing in the quilt. Gabriel held her hand for a moment, irresolutely, and then, shy of intruding on her grief, let it fall gently and walked quietly to the window. She was fast asleep. Gabriel, leaning on his elbow, looked for a few moments unresentfully on her tangled hair and half-open mouth, listening to her deep-drawn breath. So, she had that romance in her life. A man had died for her. It hardly pained him now to think how poor a part he, her husband, had played in her life. He watched her while she slept, as though he and she had never lived together as man and wife. His curious eyes rested long upon her face and on her hair, and as he thought of what she must have been then, in that time of her first girlish beauty, a strange, friendly pity for her entered his soul. He did not like to say even to himself that her face was no longer beautiful, but he knew that it was no longer the face for which Michael Fury had braved death. Perhaps she had not told him all the story. Perhaps she had not told him all the story. The air of the room chilled his shoulders. He stretched himself cautiously along under the sheets and lay down beside his wife. One by one, they were all becoming shades. Better pass boldly now into that other world in the full glory of some passion than fade and wither dismally with age. Better pass boldly into that other world in the full glory of some passion than fade and wither dismally with age. He thought of how she who lay beside him had locked in her heart for so many years that image of her lover's eyes when he had told her that he did not wish to live. Generous tears filled Gabriel's eyes. He had never felt like that himself towards any woman. But he knew that such a feeling must be love. The tears gathered more thickly in his eyes, and in the partial darkness, he imagined he saw the form of a young man standing under a dripping tree. Other forms were near. His soul had approached that region where lived the vast hosts of the dead. A few light taps upon the pane made him turn to the window. It had begun to snow again. He watched deeply the flakes, silver and dark, falling obliquely against the lamplight. Yes, the newspapers were right. Snow was general all over Ireland. Snow was general all over Ireland. It was falling on every part of the dark central plain, on the treeless hills, falling softly upon the bog of Allen, and further westward, softly falling into the dark, mutinous Shannon waves. It was falling too upon every spot of the lonely churchyard on the hill where Michael Fury lay buried. It lay thickly drifted on the crooked crosses and headstones, on the spears of the little gate, on the barren thorns. His soul swooned slowly as he heard the snow falling faintly through the universe, and faintly falling, like the descent of their last end, upon all the living and the dead.
Okay, we'll return to the dead later, but first let me introduce James Byrne, who's at the front here. First came across James's writing when I was on the number 86 bus from here to Chorlton reading his collection, White Coins. And it's one of those few moments that I've never wanted the 86 bus to stop. Just reading the opening poem, Historia, and it was just so wonderful. I wanted to just carry on. James might also be reading from his new book, Places You Leave, copies of which are at the front as well, which was the book that kind of grabbed me in particular for writing about metamodernism and contemporary British poetry. That's enough from me. James.
Yeah, good. All right. What a pleasure to be here reading to you and to follow James Joyce and Anthony, your kind introduction there. I live in Liverpool, Byrne being the surname, Irish, so we have the Celtic Gateway. You know, if you're up in Liverpool and you can see out to the Welsh hills and of course across the Irish Sea, and if you're lucky you can see, well, perhaps not as far as Scotland, but towards there. So it's really wonderful to be reading to celebrate the launch of this fantastic book from Anthony. I'd just like to say thanks to the staff here, Martin and all the staff who've cultivated this wonderful space. It's my first time here. Anyone else making their debut? Yeah? I recommend going through the stacks. I'm really impressed. And just to say, I hope this library continues to thrive. And thanks for inviting me. I'd also like to thank ARC Publications, who publish Places You Leave, which I'll read from tonight, as Anthony said. Tony and Angela, who do so much for really showing us what poetry's plural means with their publication of poetry from across the world. And of course, Anthony, who for me is not just one of the brightest and most rigorous scholars that we have, but also a very fine meta-modern himself. You can't see him blushing behind the book stacks, but yeah, I'm really honored to be included, and it's great to be sharing this space also tonight, not just with all of you, but with Scott That was wonderful. Where's he gone? Is he still dancing? There you are. That was fantastic. And of course, Sandeep as well, who you'll be hearing from after me, I believe. Two great poets. And in fact, I'm raising a child with one of them. It's not you, Scott. It's not something we haven't discussed. So I'm going to read from Places You Leave. The book travels across 7 different places. It begins in Cox's Bazar, which is, some of you will know, is the largest refugee camp in the world. Has around 800,000 people. It's several different camps, about 23 camps. And the Rohingya who live there are displaced. They can't go back to Myanmar. They're not really able to escape the camps. They're trapped. And so what I did is I went to work with Rohingya poets in the camps, and we had 3 days of workshops. And this sequence of poems, I'll read a short excerpt from, comes out from working with all the poets in the camp. So I dedicate it to them. And there's 3 poets in particular that I quote from in this section. They are Ro Maruz. That's a pseudonym, by the way, Ro for Rohingya. A lot of Rohingya artists and poets use that as the first part of the pseudonym. But also Zaki Ovais and pacifist Farouk. Perhaps one thing I could mention also is the Burmese military are called the Tatmadaw. And I also mention in this section the Naf, which is a river that goes through Bangladesh, Myanmar on one side, Bangladesh on the other. And the Tatmadaw were indiscriminately, and I believe this is still happening, firing on people trying to escape from helicopters, just shooting them as they were trying to swim to their escape in the water. So that comes up. Okay, Cox's Bazar. You plant the jackfruit's anonymous, nubbled face and wait in the boiling sand for something to happen. A goat's eye flashes gold. A girl swings on the tube well for a cup of water. You plant peas to grow in the monsoon and put on your best shirt, yellow for optimism. What is missing about the blank page is denied, decimated, you would like to cohere. Inside an airless, windowless hut, you try to rewrite Wallace Stevens' 10 Ways of Looking at a Passport, but I have never seen a passport. How does it begin? Tooth marks in the line break, you want to put the art back into heart. When your brother ran towards the Tatmadaw crying, Jesu, Jesu, you turned and ran. Jahash of air, jail, lock and key. Without art, it's just he, meaning brother. Come here, brother, but he isn't listening. Your mother bribes the army guard to write a letter and asks about the non-trial. Will the guard deliver? Hope's lottery. There is no policy on answering the letters of the law. The page is a windbreak. To write is to petition. The eye severs you in the photograph, so we repose. Someone else must always be next to you. You cannot work alone. Cyclonic clangor of rain, sword water in the Naf. The helicopter pumps into Bangladeshi airspace and fires on anyone swimming away. The poem, bare as a pulse, a knife, siblings in graves. The poem, bare as a knife, a pulse. Your father remains stuck on the border, genocide zone. Nobody is reporting from there, so nothing is said. The child draws pictures of a burning house, singing out of history in makeshift schools. You plant and write, plant and write. What else is there to do? Peas on your roof grow beside the ash fire. You knot back the twine and forecast clouds. You write, blot out, jail of air, and the words mean the same in the morning. Myanmar waits for the incendiary. The Saudis send money for guns. When you like the post about Arsa, your cousin gets a note under his hut. Zizagna Anra Felai e Zayoji. There are places we leave, you say. There are places we never leave. Home is a dream inside a nightmare. The first line of your poem begins, I am afraid of someone I don't know. Last night, your mother peeled back the tarpaulin and asked, what are you doing, my son? Why can you not sleep? Sleep. And you replied, Emily Dickinson, Emily Dickinson. You ignore the honking of the UNHCR truck and check the download speed for 100 poets in English, to learn poetry, to learn English, reload. Already they are looking to blame the same someone. The Chinese highway needs to be paid. Looking at you between palm branches brittled by soil erosion. Why is it you live in the largest refugee camp in the world and they're calling it a lost treasure, a forgotten national park? They ask you to plant trees to save the environment. Yes, you think. A few more trees to hide the smell of the latrine. Why do you write about environment? You try for the present, the sensory, but your eyes sting, your ears hum, and the smell is smoke and flesh. I want to write about family, but I have no family. The idea of the eternal traveler does not hold. To think of poetry as Orphic, to unthink memory, to unriver the severed head. As if the world were a wound flapping at bandages, as if the world were a wound, as if. So that's a short excerpt from Cox's Bazaar. I'm going to take you to Mexico now. I've been fortunate over the years to work with some extraordinary Mexican poets, and often we talk, in fact, the first time I ever went to Mexico, they took me up Popocatépetl, and at Mount Popo, it's quite extraordinary because there's the highest point you can get up is exactly what Hernan Cortés would have seen before he went into Mexico City. And I remember talking with Mexican poets, and I didn't know this, but there's a wonderful book by Bernal Garcia, which talks, and he was part of the cortege, if that's a phrase I can use. And they took a whole country, a very advanced country as Mexico was at the time, with just a few small fleets of boats. And I found this quite astonishing, and that's the section I'm going to read for you now. Mexico City, Puebla, Mexico City. A muddy footprint fossilizes on the welcome mat at Puebla, Acapulco. Bienvenidos. What is thinking inside a steel suit, dangling fake jade? The lie of friendship spread out like Echeverria. Cortez's Tule bones buried under the sensorial gardens at Chapultepec. Breath's cortex toxifies a chemicalized lago. Donna Marina whispers through the deafness of Moctezuma's ear. What rings the skin to marvel at a floating city for possession, trees shaken into fire? Mala madre, white snake dissects the green leaves. Cortez, meaning courteous, polite. Names, faces washed out, as if clean in dirty water. Standing on Tenochtitlan 500 years ago, what did you see, Bernal, beyond feathers, cloaks, and merchandise? Male and female slaves to be sold in the market. White tower of history, black holes. The gaps between your teeth spell death. What you understand to mean of money is multi-stranded, like Paz's cyclical idea of conquest. No such thing as making it, only taking it from the mouth of the world. Polyconscious, as if you might fuse eyes by looking into his eye. Mesoamerica, foxing your children, Disneyfying the television. Pero pedido, Bernal, what was it you saw from that road? And I'm going to end by taking you through Bremen and Hamburg. And yeah, quite often in this book, I mean, it's quite fragmentary and collagic, I suppose, as you sense. And there are actually some beautifully printed collages. I can't call them beautiful because I made them myself. But yeah, you see the ARC printed the collages in color. I was really pleased by that. And yeah, sort of thinking of the aesthetic of the book and their relationship with the collage, I think it's a kind of what Charles Bernstein talks about as a kind of aesthetic justice, or what I would consider to be a kind of dialogic approach between writerly aesthetic and visual representation of a text. So I'll start in at the beginning of the poem, where I was there for a poetry festival. All the sections of this book are from invitations to go and read internationally, which I feel very blessed to say. But at one point during the festival, I just wandered off, and there was this protest going on of children who were protesting for climate change action. And that's where this section begins, and then I'll jump to Hamburg. Over Bürgermeister Bridge, children protest, one with a paper globe, declaring capitalismus. Child, listen to the grown-up children who do not listen to you. They are wearing tailored suits and speak inside the static of worldwide radio. Android corporate on speakerphone, the sponsor tonight wears a logo called Joke. The replicants are laid out like stencil furniture under heat lamps. Child, someone decided this is X, the exact point where the aliens will land. Du spricht keiner keins, the day weight lump in your stomach. You wait inside the absence of a window and count a sparrow's footprints, malt of sleeplessness. The room cleans itself when you close the door. Animal in a sensorial zodiac, the auditorium waits for you to speak, but you cannot remember yourself beyond the functionaries of language. 200 hearts beat in mirror wind. In heavy breath silence, the culture secretary's jewelry titters. Everything is gold, down to the subtitles. Because touch touches everything and moves through everything, why is it nothing touches you? As if life meant waiting for someone else. Don't touch me. You write a letter to Gasquet on the riverbanks of the Weser, little more than a creek in the wind of language. You write, your tribunes are filled with silt. Strike it out. Revision. Your tributes are filled with the filthiest of secrets. To edit yourself out, another kind of dying, your hair crooked in the photo book. You drag your Hippolytean iron foot, a simple vulgus, hunnishly indecent. In the archive footage, Bovary's eyes twitch like the wings of a butterfly. Talus fenetre, optimal storage of the eye, the beating skin of the canal, time's color, soured only by time. The children demand nothing, only a planet. And into Hamburg, you track your footprints in snow at the Berlin Victory Monument. You've been up all night, watching Churchill's greasy finger blot the sky with fire, boil the stars of Europe. Groggy, you search for coffee only to find food menus. From your window, Hafen City's dredged propeller, unmoved. You go to the Kunsthalle, extended as protag. Faces of gaping blank holes stare through the human graph, where the only distinguishable word is hopeful. 14.40 over 560, you write it down, but do not understand the equation. It's about making choices. Tick the nervous box or the uneasy box, as if choosing between statesman and businessman. If someone could tell you why the card measures at 4.3 inches for 7 days in February, it might work out all right. On the map, blue is Israel, Syria is red, Palestine missing. The manifesto declares protest as anti-ammunition. But if red is 40%, how do you live without it? Weaponries meaning stock prizes, NATO receipts. A game is their history, unblooded, older than ours. They don't need historians, henchmen. And so splinter music, and so a clock ticks above the bomb. Step this way, says the businessman. I can stop you dead like a rattlesnake's eye. You save the date, 24th of June 2045, when the financial singularity crashes, when the visor finally slips from your face. Or else this, and with clear face heavies to tell you about it. Gross capital cut-ups intended as much as stamp book fixities. How might you go, how low might you go for a half kilo of spec? Car windows for 2-hour limits, mosques turning grey. Every small consolation is tradable. Skeletons at the money counter. The bugs have their own voices. And Goethe has been looking down on you, the unplucked chicken. Your face shrinks into lines. A man who can grow numbers on his hands waits to count you at the weigh-in. If you want to know why all this is happening, I don't want to know why all this is. Try speaking with the undead. You pull away from the handshake and listen in, one ear busy with the voices you hear between radio stations. You wheeze on a cane-backed chair, too tired to speak up or sit up, your finger on the dial of the late-night local shock jock. To talk with you, eye to iris, as if through a veneer of smoke. The glass on your mother's portrait breaks in your hand, and her blood, your blood, is speaking. All elegy is a held note. Father, wounded by language, what song do you sing? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, James. As I said before, we have copies of the book that James is just reading from, Places You Leave, at the front. And there's a long analysis, which I do in the book, of the poem that James is reading an extract from at the beginning, from Cox's Bazaar. Now let me introduce our last poet for the evening, Sandeep Parmar. I first came across Sandeep's collection Eidolon, which he'll be reading from, about 8 years ago. Again, it was a bit of a number 86 bus moment, where it's this extraordinary collection about Helen, the classical figure, Helen of Troy. And the book, which Sandeep will introduce as well, talks about how enigmatic this figure is. You know, who knows what Helen actually looked like. And I was particularly struck by how the form of her writing kind of matches that enigmaticalness as well. But if it's ready, I shall let Sandeep introduce her book.
Hi everyone, it's lovely to be celebrating meta-modernisms with all of you. They're not actually being there, but I'm going to read from Eidolon. But before I do that, I'd like to start in the vein of celebrating modernism to an extent, by reading a poem by Hilda Doolittle, which is about Helen of Troy, which is the subject of Eidolon. It's from Heliodora from her 1924 collection, so well before Helen in Egypt. Helen. All Greece hates the still eyes in the white face, the luster as of olives where she stands, and the white hands. All Greece reviles the wan face when she smiles, hating it deeper still when it grows wan and white, remembering past enchantments and past ills. Greece sees unmoved God's daughter, born of love, the beauty of cool feet and slenderest knees. Could love indeed the maid, only if she were laid, white ash, amid funereal cypresses. So Eidolon is a book of 50 short poems, and I'll just read some of those. Not in order. It was not me, but a phantom, whose oath, a variable star mouldering in the reliquary, is doubt. I have not unsealed love, its taproot, mouthing blackness, nor seized the fairer woman to purge from her song. This hell house of primogeniture, bookish and pale, quartering what is also its own and only rule, this fire and the fire that comes from fire. Helen dispirited, camera bound. Helen fetching the paper from the front lawn in her dressing gown a lot of the time, and knowing when the phone will ring seconds before by the click of its current. Demi-goddess, not woman, not God, disembodied like a bowl turned over and its loaf thumping out. Helen, queen of never mind the time, of you can't run on gin for all the everlasting, and such moths broiling airlessly in a sodium bulb, smell of it on her front porch, lights on, home. Waking to a November morning, to pins running across a yardage of wool or headaches, the circular world disfigured by food. Corn cobs in the sink gleam like teeth up her spine. Hurry up the bus goes, and its déshabillement goes, loaming on after it. I do not insist that we retain the old names. I would know you, ever light as the seed. Marketing the day-long détente for a sliver of profit does not appear to bother the kingdom of saints. Ascetics, her brothers, Spartans, whose only God is, insert here the death, the death of 11 days. Wash the man by the road who turns and seeing or not seeing is soundless, animal. Wash him, he is your brother. Enter his encampment of fuel-scarred fabrics and listen to his black pronouncements, void of exhaust. Scramble up the highway's escarpment, inviolate, good, wash him, or be without brothers. Helen denuded, Helen, a place of pallor where silk shrinks around her throat, exits the office, mindless, purposeless, walking into and out of, through and over, up and around, into and out of, hands waving, mindless purpose, metal tint to everything, Stesichorus blinded for watching her cross the street, outside and into the car, horn blaring. U.S. national interests. Matters of vital interest to the United States to include national security, public safety, national economic security, the safe and reliable functioning of critical infrastructure, and the availability of key resources. PPD, Presidential Policy Directive 20, top secret. It has, of course, occurred to me that this conversation is being recorded, but what you say does not anyway belong to me. We are going. Shall we go? Let us go. And if we do go, knowing little of where, who will put the lamp out as we leave? But where is what I started for so long ago, and why is it yet unfound? Whitman. The 1913 local prosecutor training manual warns no Jews, Negroes, Dagos, Mexicans, or a member of any minority race on a jury, no matter how rich or well educated. The 1986 manual warns against those with multiple gold chains or free thinkers. As a wheel on its axis turns, this book unwitting to itself, around the idea of thee, Whitman. Helen of Sparta, of Troy, in Egypt, of no known address, of no known nationality, refugee of no known conflict, stateless, without property, disappearing under a veil of treason. I am not the Virgin Mother, lamenting in the hills above Ephesus. I am the invective, injuring these dry plains studded with stone pines. I am the lateral commemorate of war. As the steps up to my hiding place suggest, I am the birther of sacrifice, received back into the earth, heavenly rock face. If you knew my real name, you would not use it so lightly. An idea is not a woman, but many women, the composite of an idea. Ours is an older civilization, remade, dramatis personae recast by different troops, rebuilt in the style of Ionian capitals and fluted pilasters, put through the ringer of the magisterium. We see the real Helen is the false we, is the eidolon. Put first before the rest as light for all, an entrance song of all, that of eidolons. Whitman. No one alive remembers the unrecordable warmth of my breath. Let us be as a city upon a hill, as a stone or several stones, as white shells in each city's layer, each layer a memorable human hour, gathering the sea and all its warble in the dust. If you roll into LA from the east by car, by road through oaks and sycamores that give way to studio lots, barred up like penitentiaries, dreams assembled stone by stone behind a forbidding wall wreathed by wire. If you enter from the air, descending through smog, its brown meniscus, watch the city light up like a motherboard on high alert from the dry sanctuary between Vegas and mountain ranges. The bric-a-brac of cacti, the desert lore of cannibalism, the invisible tribes of off the gridsmen rattling tenderly in the ears of cascading sierras. Let us be as a city on the stones of other cities. Troy, dignified and silent, draws a stratified cloak of 9 kingdoms over its brittle shoulders. Its cape of stone has been smoothed by the humble footfall of its slaves and women. Stop and listen as you stand high on its brow. Hear the hot wind rush up the hillsides of brush through some sort of oak, we think. We collect its seeds to plant a Troy tree in our Californian garden. My mother, convinced it will live, unlike the pomegranate, fruitless, wanting some eternal myth denied by the Pacific. Biblical fruit, sole comfort of the dead, its globules of ruby life, 613 cells of blood that pour in the Babylonian crush of idle days and endless cruelties. No, it will not grow on my mother's lawn in an exile's confusion of lavender, red marigold, and lily flower. Mother, let us be as a city rising, not swept through by the greed of rumored enemies. If you arrived by boat to Troy through quietest midnight, in the pre-blue of black, slipping in the tide past Lemnos, abrupt on the horizon, you will see the sun erupt from behind a panorama of cloud. Lighted scenes of warring gods, burning in their silhouettes, the carnage that burnishes gold, scattered without excessive note over the Trojan plain. Helen as a beam of moonlight, caught sideways. Helen refracted onto thresholds, her reflection a holy cult of high-born women ululating in bedrooms, gripping the mirror hard that bears her standard. Helen with beauty like a tightened bow, the window clapping shut like an iron gate. She does the latch, empty, diffuse glow. Now focus on her lithe and loathed silhouette. See if it makes plain how a woman could be mistaken by so many men for a ghost, bartered dead by nudist song, even in this unacknowledged light, at this impossible angle. Thanks.
Hey, thank you, Sandeep. If you're watching on the live stream, that's Sandeep's extraordinary collection, Eidolon. So if you're interested in that, and HD and Helen of Troy, I've got a whole chapter on that book in metamodernism and contemporary British poetry. So I shall end the reading now, which I think is suitable, with the acknowledgements. When I first discussed the outline of this book with Dr. Richard Jones in summer 2014, we were enjoying a bumper season of red admirals and outsized artichokes. Richard worked in the geography department at the University of Exeter, and we had plans to create an app for Dartmoor that would explain the physical aspects of the landscape, matched with excerpts of literature. I would like to think that we had an indefinite but important sense of the poetics of each other's subject. Mud was not just mud for Richard, but the beginnings of narratives of memory, adventure and trauma, from stories of caked showers when attempting to corral his samples to the uncovering of skulls when coring in China. My memories of learning physical geography at school included the savouring of new language, coombe, arete, col, and the imaginative acts of trying to square the diagrams of glaciers with recollections of family hikes on Coniston Old Man and Helvellyn. Both me and Richard were responding to the poetics of place in different but connected ways. Bloom lines on ordnance maps react to the landscape of Dartmoor in an imaginative way, just as literature might respond expansively to its tors. I can see Richard smiling. Yes, but when you get lost in the fog near Ponsworthy, try getting home with a poem. In 2016, Richard was diagnosed with terminal cancer. Despite increasing debility, he still walked with us to those tours and around the Devon and Cornwall coast, Cotahealy, Bear Alston, Foy. Just before he lost his eyesight, we wandered into an old railway cutting above Tavistock, exploring the tea-coloured water and sharp edges of dynamited stone. Chatting about mutual friends, he laughed in his characteristic way. There's been too many funerals this year. Typical of Richard's humour, it is still the most astonishing thing I've ever heard anybody say. In April 2019, we visited his memorial stone at Urswick Tarn in Cumbria. The village was peaceful and unseasonably warm, and our families milled around the stone's position at a jetty's edge. A plaque explains that Dr. Jones was a physical geographer whose research at this tarn and elsewhere around the world added greatly to our knowledge of the Holocene. Given that this book completes a project that I'd first discussed with Richard 6 years earlier, it might be suitable to end these acknowledgements with a poem. Marl. Herons stumble the fetch. Urswick holds its flash, setting the tarn with our wake, appropriate as our grief through laughter, where grass spikes the meniscus and sunmotes blur our digital snap. Hug the embarrassment of this plaque. Morning as clear as fish that roll air and under the boardwalk. We taste the edge of Marham, faces in all shore directions, eyes string the reed buntings, jittering their pad. Marl adds to our knowledge of the Holocene. Your core sampler hods to pollen, where forests mould to a crick and insects peat our memory. Grain fires the cap to a dating spree. Photos out-tilt the jetty's pitch as we walk out in our guilty retrieval. Thank you. Thanks everybody for coming. Thank you to the performers, Scott Thurston, Sandeep Parmar, James Byrne, Noreen. As I said, the books are available at the front from James Byrne, from Scott and myself. Feel free to stay, mill around. We still have plenty of food and snacks from On the 8th D. And thank you very much, everybody, for coming. Thank you.